Good evening and welcome to UK Crime Book Club. This evening, I'm delighted to be joined a little bit later than advertised because we just had a few tech gremlins to deal with. So I'm delighted to be joined by Michael Cordy.
Very nice to be here, Karen. Thank you.
And Michael, I can hear myself talking. We're having mega gremlin problems. I'm going to have to just ignore myself. Right. So sorry. Michael has written 7 books, and his latest book, Matt Hatton's Manhattan Down, is out now. And would you like to tell us about it, Michael?
Yes, I would actually. Very nice. Thank you for allowing me to. It's my 7th book, my first in about 10 years, and because I spent the last 10 years playing around with, I've sold, I think, 4 of my books in different states, sold to Hollywood studios, and I got rather seduced by the let's try and get a movie made out of one of your books. And we had a few very close calls, which made it even more seductive. But then I kind of realized I was getting a bit frustrated, and I wanted to sort of get back to, with writing a novel, it's completely yours. Anyway, long story short, the pandemic came, and I was sort of I'd started another story, but it was a big one, and I wasn't sure whether I was up for it. And then I was running in the park, and I had this idea of in one of those weird mornings during the pandemic when the sky was blue but no planes were in it, there was no road noise, it was all quiet, and I suddenly had this vision that I was the only person in the world. Everyone else was asleep, and I had this vision of what it would be like in somewhere like Manhattan, the famously the city that never sleeps. Imagine running those streets when everyone's either not there or asleep. And this idea came to me, and I just read this book about a family that had this awful insomnia that was terrifying, and I had another idea at the same time about climate change was awful, and imagine if these heat domes were all a thing at the time, and what if all the world leaders were in Manhattan at the same time to sort of finally address the climate change, which they hadn't done ever, when something happens that they all collapse. And I remember I was in this park and I thought, I've got an idea here somewhere. It was all a bit muddled, and I rushed back, and while I couldn't do my normal distraction techniques, I just wrote a novel. My wife and my daughter in the house with me. We could just do what we had to do, but I had to sit and write, and I wrote this book, and it was all about. And shall I tell you what the basic premise of the story is?
Please do. Yeah.
Because from the basic idea of all these sort of rather garbled thoughts about lack of sleep and everything else, this through line came to me of a woman who's just received devastating news, and is coming across the Brooklyn Bridge to pick up her daughter after school in Manhattan, and it's on the anniversary eve of 9/11. New York's under a heat dome of the hottest temperatures ever recorded. All world leaders are in the UN to try and sort this out. But at 5:25 p.m. exactly, everyone on the island collapses. Everybody, including the world leaders, except for her and a wounded policeman who wakes out of a coma at exactly the same time that everyone falls into one. And his first concern is the city, because he suspects that the reason why he's in this coma was to do with linked to this thing, and he wants to solve what's going on. Was her first concern, the only concern, is to find her daughter and get her off the island. But of course, things don't always work out as you plan. They meet, and they have to sort of work together to work out what the hell's going on. And as night draws in, it gets weirder and weirder, and they have to decide together how far they will go and what lines they will cross in order to rescue what matters most to each of them. So it's there, and then we're away at the races. That's the storyline.
Yeah, I mean, it's really really fast-paced thriller. Once you get going, you're really into it, and don't want to put it down. It's a real page turner. What was your inspiration? You said about that sort of COVID and that time, but sort of why Manhattan?
Well, I think there was a confluence of inspirations. all of my books in the past and this one, they all try and look at quite big issues, and these tensions between what is factually correct and what is sort of what people believe or want to believe. And climate change has become one of those things, where all the science is saying it's a real thing, but a lot of people try and claim for either issues of ignorance or an agenda that, oh no, I don't believe that. So it's almost like there's a heresy involved about whether you believe it or not. And that was quite interesting because a lot of my other books are about religion versus science and that sort of thing. So I was quite inspired by the high concept of that.
Yeah.
And then Manhattan just was the great place because it was the hub of where man has put his deepest footprint on the world. And if that was under threat, and that collapsed, it's got this financial center, all the world leaders are there. So if you wanted to have a microcosm for the fulcrum to sort of twist the world around, that would probably be where you'd put your pressure, because you could do a lot of damage or exert a lot of pressure on a lot of things in a very small space.
Rather than trying to spread it around.
Exactly. So if you just in that little island, if you put that down and said, right, you've got to do what we say now. You'd stop Wall Street. You'd stop world leaders. Every world leader. The whole world has got no leaders. Wall Street won't open on Monday. All these other things occur, and it. So I was inspired by when I had this idea for something. What might happen. It was then where it has to happen somewhere of significance, and that's the inspiration. It was like all these ideas. They tend to be a confluence of about 3 or 4 different ideas that come together, and that's what happened. And as I wrote it, and I got my characters' motivations organized, as the cliche goes, they do kind of take you where you want to go, or where they want to go, I should say.
Yeah, that sort of leads me nicely onto my sort of next question, which is about the characters. So you've got Samantha Rossi, who you talked about, has just had the devastated diagnosis. And she's sort of frantically looking for her daughter, who's gone to a sort of play date sort of thing. She's older, isn't she? But
yeah.
Sort of things. But yeah, I thought her illness, fatal familial insomnia. How did that sort of come about?
Well, first thing is, I must confess to having a fascination in all weird things. My writing is always about finding new technology, new ideas, and sadly, really odd diseases. I mean, I've written books about prosopagnosia, about people who can't recognize faces, and all these other things. But this one, when I read about this book, it's called The Family That Couldn't Sleep. And apparently there are only 20 or 30 families in the entire world who have this gene. I mean, it's incredibly, vanishingly rare, thank goodness, because it's horrible. But I read this thing and was full of compassion and everything else for what's happening. There was also a bit of me, the author of me going, oh, I could use this. And also because there's something I liked about having somebody receive devastating news about something and then put themselves in a position where for a short period of time, that gives them a weird superpower because they're not affected by it. But this day of execution won't help them, but it does allow them to have agency. And when you write any character, particularly female characters who notoriously have no agency in stories, I like the idea of this character having agency. She's got motivation to go and find her daughter. She's got to get this thing, but she can because she's not asleep. She's literally the opposite. She's not Sleeping Beauty. She's the opposite of that. So her and this other, so I like all that. And this whole idea about sleep and wake and waking the world up from stuff, climate change, etc., and putting people to sleep to wake them up. All those word games and also different states. And one man who is asleep, a woman who can't sleep, and they meet for a moment in time and they make a connection. Are they going to be divided forever by these two states? Like the Montagues and the Capulets and Romeo and Juliet, but not from families, but because I might fall asleep again and never wake, and you might never sleep. But they're sort of divided by just for this brief moment in time when they meet and their lives intersect. So all that stuff and the character, because she meets this other character who's a more straightforward character, really, because he's a kind of policeman who's got more straightforward motivations, but they're personal because someone he was partnered with he would suspect has been harmed by the people who he thinks have done this, and so he's got a personal motivation, but also he's got the normal job I'm the only guy standing. Of all the first responders,
Yeah.
I can either run off the island and say, need help, but no one else can get on it. Only he can get on it. So he's kind of, you either walk away or you stand and you do what you got to do. And he kind of chooses that, as all good heroes do, but he can't do it all alone. And he gets lost. And the only person who can help him is Samantha Rossi, who has these other skills to come to bear. So there's this, I liked sort of, they both help each other, even when they don't want to at times, to further each other's ends to solve what's going on.
Well, because they both get pulled into the sort of the bad group, isn't it?
Yeah. Whoever the people, the baddies who are doing this.
Yeah.
But then you get confused because how bad are they? And are they all? Is this a bad thing they're doing, or is this a sort of? And you get into the whole issue of activists versus terrorists.
Yeah.
How much should you do to, would you sacrifice 4 million souls to save the world? Would you? It depends what you believe again. And I liked all that. There was a lot of stuff. And with it also, I met somebody who had interviewed a lot of people in Extinction Rebellion. He said what struck him about these groups is all of them are different. There's not some sort of homogenous group of people who have the same motivations. Some guys are like disaffected this. Some people are just older who feel guilty about the fact that they've left the generation behind them with a world worse than they inherited. There are other people who are frankly just like to burn the world down, so there's a whole confederacy of different motivations, which I found really interesting as well. So they all have individual characteristics too. So when our sort of inverted commas heroes meet them and clash, you can have a good melee in this very weird environment of a city that it's not dormant completely, because all the people in it have these parasomnias, these sleep.
Yeah.
So it's not just a passive place. It's quite a dangerous place and quite an odd place. And the animals act odd because whatever's causing the humans to collapse is agitating the animals. And you see spider webs, which are all badly formed because obviously they're not, and so I find it a very weird world you created. So the authorities who are outsiders have to work out what's going on and why and what their objectives are. And so we have these two, we're in the sort of dome and we're out of it. And I found that to try and manage that from a storytelling point of view was quite fun as well.
Because I was really intrigued with the techie side of it as well. So you said that you like looking at, sort of unusual diseases and things, but do you like going into that sort of really sort of techie, the sound waves and all that sort of thing?
Yeah. Well, I think because I know nothing about, I have no science background at all, I should state. Therefore, there is a kind of view that people say write about what you know. I like to write about what I'd like to know.
Yeah.
So I will find something, have an idea, and then I'll often make up something ridiculous. Then I'll go, well, could that happen? Then I'll talk to people who are cleverer than me about certain areas. Oh yeah, that's that. And often it's frightening how you go up to somebody with this amazing new thought, and they'll go, oh yeah, that would exist. That's a so-and-so, or it's a this. So no idea I had was so outlandish that I couldn't find at least a beginning of it. And all you need to make this work, I think, when I read books, is the beginnings of the factual element of it. And then you can build your ladder across the ice of credulity and not make it crack. If you start from nothing and it's complete nonsense, but if you can create a strong internal logic based upon a premise that is sound, you can take it quite far and have a lot of fun with it. And often when you do it and you talk to somebody else in the business, they go, oh yeah, no, we're doing that, we're working on that.
Yeah.
And now we're now in a world of billionaires who've got more money than sense, who are inventing loads of weird and wonderful things that you can almost, whatever you imagine, like in Hollywood, whatever you imagine, you can put up on screen now with CGI. Now also other areas, there's so much money and so many resources and so little regulation in some areas that a lot of things you can invent can happen relatively quickly. And that's what I find mind-boggling. You almost trying to keep ahead of it is really, really tough.
So we've got a couple of people watching along with us. And Caroline says hi, Laura says hi, and Laura said, do you have any experts that you consult for the story?
I do. I tend to find a lot of the time I read I read books and stuff, and I read like the New Scientist law, and often before I've got an idea, they'll give me ideas. So often it's almost like you take stock before you need them. But the other thing I'll do also is, rather than, if I get a really knotty issue, I'll talk to people. So for my first novel about genes and because it was about, if you could find a sample of Christ's DNA, would you be able to find the genes of normal man, or would you find the genes of God? And it was kind of like, wow. And I remember I met somebody at a conference and I spoke to them, and I just took them out for lunch and talked about, because they were doing biochemistry and genetics. And it was frightening how often they say, yeah, we're doing that. Oh, yeah, we can do that. I mean, we can't because we're not allowed to, but not because of technically.
Ethics.
So, yes, I talk to scientists who will tell me how far they can go, not necessarily how far they should go. And it's quite a long way. And that, where they can explain it to me simply, then I can put it into a book. Then people who do know what they're talking about don't just go, oh, I can't read this. They'll go, okay, it's a bit, you're taking it, pushing it, but I'll go with you because you've obviously done the basics. So I'll allow you to sort of take me a bit further than I would normally go. So yes, I do research. I do talk to experts when I can. Yeah.
And does your research take you down some big rabbit holes? I imagine it does.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, but again, one day it's a rabbit hole, the next day, and I make notes and keep everything, because sometimes that thing which went nowhere because it led to that weird place, another book you might write, you go, oh, that weird place might be the answer to this other issue I'm doing. So I don't think anything's wasted. I just think that you have to be very open-minded about where you look, but very robust and quite streamlined. A bit like when you kind of edit, you write anything, but you have to edit quite strictly, but you mustn't let that get in the way of your writing. So your writing should be very free, but your editing should be very, very sort of strict. Similarly with research, I think. Research everything, go blue sky, but then when you get into sort of like, what are you going to use, be quite ruthless. No, can't use that, can't use that. I just don't believe that, whatever. So yeah, I would do that.
And we talked about just briefly about the pace of the book, about the sort of process of writing something that is that sort of high concept, high speed. Do you have to write like that quickly? You know, do you
well, no, that's the weird thing. No, I don't think it works that way. There's a really weird connection between the writing and the reading. I do try and write books that are quick because I almost want to sort of I think my instinct is always to keep you going, particularly if I'm going about science in it and big concepts in it. I don't want to have people going, oh my gosh, she's going on about that thing again. I want to try and get into the story quickly and then take you there. And this time I even used present tense to make it even more immediate, which originally it wasn't. It was past tense, but the present tense made it more screenplay-like, which is dangerous because it can be a bit surface. But I wanted to make it fast. So there's the tense thing, which does help to make it more immediate, I think. But the writing is interesting because sometimes when I think I'm having a day when I'm really writing fast and it's going flowingly, it's not great stuff when I read over it. Other days when it's really hard and I'm really struggling, but the old adage is, if you only write when you're inspired, but I'll make sure you're inspired between 9 and 5 every day. So you write even when you're not inspired. Often those days, funnily enough, are the most productive and effective. And you read them afterwards, okay, so there's no rhyme or reason. You have to try and work fast to an extent to not catch up with your own self-doubt.
Yeah.
But otherwise, the writing quickly and the reading quickly don't always follow. Sometimes you have to write slowly and methodically to make it read well, if you know what I mean.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. So the concept, let me see if I can say this properly. I can't say it.
Somnopolis, which was my original title, funny enough.
Yeah, I was it.
That's the reason why I didn't use it.
No, because nobody can say it. I was practicing it yesterday, and I was like, I can get it right. And I thought, live, I won't say it right. But this is the idea of the sleep effect, isn't it? This is what happens to everybody in this story.
When it comes to Latin, somnus, sleep, and polis, city, like Acropolis, Megalopolis, Somnopolis is sleep. But too clever by half. But it's sort of, it's in the book, and it's the sort of thing that people would use. But as a title of a book, I thought no. But that is the concept. The concept is, and if they don't do what they say, they can turn a Somnopolis into a necropolis, which is the city of the dead. Because there's not a great difference between being asleep and then if you carry on, because there's this lovely concept. Again, I picked up this other idea of this rule of threes, where if you in survival there are this rule of threes where if you don't have any air for 3 hours, for 3 minutes, I think you will die. You will just suffocate. If you don't drink any water for 3 days, or if you don't, oh yes, if you're in a very hostile environment, like a really icy cold for 3 hours, you will die. If you don't drink for 3 days, you will die. If you don't eat for 3 weeks, you will probably die. Not everybody, but there's a kind of rule of threes. And this book, to put a sort of time lock on it, because it's a heat dome and it's really hot, you can't just go, well, let's see what happens and let them wake up. But actually, because it's hot and they're dehydrating, within 3 days,
they'd all be dead.
These people who are asleep, they could be dead. So it's a very real threat, which again you have to inject because it's a passive situation. They're lying down, but of course they're getting up and sleepwalking and stuff and all these other nonsensical things. But the idea that this rule of three, I found again another interesting fact that these some experts have tried to find out how to survive in different contexts.
Yeah.
Because
and also the sort of the sleep idea was brought on by inspired the fact that your daughter.
Oh yeah, I know. Because no, that's really true. Because Samantha Rossi has the serious disease, a serious problem which she has to address. But also in it, her daughter has something called reflex anoxic seizures, which is when it presents itself first of all as like epilepsy when you're very young. But luckily it's not that; it's something else, and you outgrow it usually, and it's not as traumatic. It doesn't cause brain damage. It just means that you collapse and you have a small fit, but your heart stops and your brain stops. As a parent, it's terrifying. But anyway, I was trying to, for my character, the daughter character, I wanted to make her functional and active and brave, but also give her a vulnerability, because I'm a great believer that vulnerability doesn't make you weak; it makes you strong. It's just lack of armor. So you kind of makes you even braver if you go into battle and you've got some sort of Achilles heel. And I was thinking about this, and Jenny, my wife, said, "Well, use that." And I said, "I can't." So I spoke to my daughter, Phoebe, who's now 20 years old and at university, and she said, "Oh, great, good idea." And she loves storytelling as well. And I think she liked the idea of being able to tell her dad, "No, you're wrong. It's not like that at all." Because when she realised it was about making a victim into a hero, making a thing which people are looking, oh, poor girl, into sort of like, no, good for you. You're handling it.
Yeah.
She found that she wanted to make it more, and also more people hear about it in a sense of somebody who can use it and have agency again. I think that's a good thing. So
it's like using it in a positive way, isn't it?
Yes, exactly.
Showing it as the negative side of it, of
yes,
you could do this. But yeah,
no, you could do things despite it rather than can't do it because of it, sort of thing. Yeah, exactly that.
So going back to the sort of 7 deadly sins, so that's you've got, I've written down greed, gluttony, wrath, sloth, envy and pride.
Thank you for that. I wouldn't have been able to do it.
Well, I thought I'll never remember them all when I'm sat here, so I wrote them down.
That's a good idea.
So can you tell us a little bit about them and how they came about?
Well, there was like I said earlier, there was an idea that I wanted to have all these characters having their own individual agendas, so they're not just a homogenous mass of people who are like, right on, let's save the world, or not. Some of them might have other motives which others aren't aware of, but they're a mixed bag they're a loose confederacy of different motives. But what I wanted to have was some unifying thing, and everyone has names these days, which are the Waking Eye. Even the recent people who've hacked Marks and Spencer are called the Scattered Spider. What is waking name? This group is called the Waking Eye. But I was trying to give all the names. They wouldn't use their own names, and it's a cliche they call everyone colours. That's been used before, or whatever. But I wanted to give them names, and I had all these other ideas. I had one which was giving them all anagrams of Robin Hood and his merry men and all this nonsense, which you do in your first draft. But then I think it's talked about. Jenny, I think, said, well, you can use, because they're kind of, if they're trying to make the leaders of the world atone for their sins, because these sins will visit them and catch up with them. Name them the sins. They are going to sort of catch up with them in name. This is the sins, the night of judgment, and here they are, and they'll give them all names because they don't want to. They don't even know who each other is. They're all a confederacy. Have all met on the dark web, and so the seven deadly sins seem like a good one, and then so all of them are known by that, and some have characteristics linked to it, but not really. They're just names. But it allowed the individuals to be separated and told apart by the reader, but also by me.
Yeah.
But also it allowed them to have a sort of a collection as well, and a kind of collective purpose and a poetic meaning when they talk to the world leaders about what they want.
And it also allows for Nick the detective Nick Lockwood, to infiltrate, doesn't he?
Yeah, because he has an encounter first of all with somebody who doesn't know who is, who he realizes might be involved in this, and he kind of assumes his identity because no one knows each other because they're all identity. So he kind of, but he doesn't know what they're doing and why they're doing it, and they think because he's this other person, he must have a particular skill which he has to have, which he's not sure he has. He doesn't know what it is. So yes, so the plot thickens, as they say.
It's really difficult to go into too much detail because
exactly
get around, but you don't want to give away the obviously to give away enough, but not to give away the story.
No, it is. I think and actually that was hard. Whenever you write a book like this, which is quite involved, and there were twists and turns, and there are sort of not so much twists, although there are, but reveals of this is what's happening with this person. This is how they did it. This is what they're trying to do, and to have most amount of impact for those, you have to really sort of play them. I think stories are what you don't tell somebody yet, and then so when you place these pieces of information in the reader's mind. So therefore, what you try and do when you talk about it, even when you write the back of blurb or something on a cover, you don't want to sort of ruin the bits which you think are good. But often readers have their own views about which bit work best. But no, it's important to say the bits which hopefully lead you into the story, but not the bits that make you go, "Oh, I know that now," because you don't want them to feel that. Because there are, I think, exciting and interesting issues which are revealed, but also mysteries, but also there are things which are told and learnt in it, because I think I learnt a lot by writing it about certain facts about our world, like how many people in the world have as much money as the poorest half of the entire global population, which was shocking.
Yeah. I know, I was shocked at that. I was like, is that real?
And it kind of is virtually give or take, because it does change, but it's we're in the ballpark. I mean, it's ridiculous. So that kind of stuff I find it gives it meaning, because when you write these thrillers, you try and on the one hand make it really exciting and fast, but you also want to give them some information, some meaning in it, some point, some kind of intellectual or ethical calories, if you like. So you do actually go, when I've really read it, I was good, but it made me think about things which aren't just about how hot the beach is when you're lying on it. So that's what I aspire to, at least. Yeah.
No, definitely, and I think there's a lot in it. There's a lot of things that I've not heard of. The diseases and the illnesses, but also the technology that blew my mind. And some of it I was like, wow.
But again, that's the weird thing, Karen. I was when I was trying to work out how they did this thing and put the country to sleep. There's all these different ways, and I did a sort of thought experiment with my characters, and they were all just saying, "How? Well, it can't be that. It can't be this. It can't because," which is in the book. And then I read somewhere something really weird, something about 3 years ago about something that happened, and I thought that might work. And then I did more research in it, and you got to tweak it a bit, and like they were going to do it. You take this technology and then you fine tune it. But and then when they talk about it and they do it, yes, that would work. And I thought, okay, that's fine. So it's often things you've heard of before to try and explain what you need to do. You can take that, like you said earlier about going down a rabbit hole for something else. That's like a jackdaw. You don't throw it, you keep it in the nest, that shiny item. And then later on you go, oh, that thing on the lower shelf, that might work. And then you take that and you polish it. And then you add a bit of stuff to it. You talk to somebody who knows what they're talking about and go, no, but if you did this, you could make it happen. And you go, okay. So yes, it's all about that sort of stuff. It's
So,
great.
I mean, I was worked in libraries for many years, so you've basically got a library in your brain of all the
Yes.
stuff that you can access.
I think, well, now with the internet, it's amazing because literally my first novel, I remember two things that showed you how we've moved along in terms of writing and reading is that my first novel I researched almost entirely by individuals talking to or going to the library. And by my second novel, I remember I needed to understand what one room was like in the White House. And I could click on a button, get onto the screen, and I could see the parquetry of the floor, the crystal chandeliers. I could see the actual room. I didn't have to read about it in a click. And similarly, when I sent my drafts off to American publishers and stuff, it was all thick reams of paper.
Yeah.
And literally by one book later, it was a press of a button and a PDF file goes across. And research-wise, and the whole of this world we're in, I mean, you as a librarian must have really found that the books are really valuable, lovely things. They smell and they have good memory with bookmarks, and they're technically very clever. But when you now look at what people are doing, it's fun, but also a little bit sort of like scary about the things you value and treasure. You want to sort of keep them still because they do have a value which we're not even sure we understand yet.
No, it's. I think. I mean, I love books. So.
Yeah, that's apparent.
So that sort of transition from going from like the old reference library where people used to come in and sit down and read the books for when that went and was replaced with computers, that was quite sad as a librarian, but you also realise that things have to move on, and they do.
And I find that, I can't deny it, I find that really helpful. But I still like having, I can't see my shelf over there, reference books. I
Yeah.
still like to get out although Word used to go press thesaurus, but I still like to get out an encyclopedia or something, or a magazine or a book and read it. Because I do find that, I think even, perhaps it's just psychological, but it makes you more contemplative and it makes you more lean back and think, rather than lean forward and sort of try and close it down. There's something about the body language and everything about it that makes your mind open up a bit. I find anyway. Perhaps I'm just
No,
too old school.
I think there is something in it. I remember reading once something about like reading a book on a Kindle where you swipe, and reading a book on a page, and apparently your brain has to process it slower if you're reading it on a book than it does if you're on a screen.
That makes sense. That again, it means you're more contemplative about the whole thing. You're sort of absorbing it slower, but probably better or deeper.
Yeah, deeper. Yeah, I think that was part of it. Yeah. Can we talk about your sort of writing as a whole? Because obviously this book has you've had a bit of a gap, haven't you, in your writing, and
absolutely.
You sort of said it was different, the process. How did that sort of differ to your other books?
Well, I think, there was this element. First of all, I do have a kind of a process which is common. There's two processes. There's the sort of the intellectual process about how you write. There's also the discipline of it, because there is a kind of sit down and write element to it. So you have to carve out time each day and just write and just try and get words done. There is a mechanical element to it, but there is a sort of and that got better because of the pandemic. So when I decided to write this novel, I found it helpful to have nothing else to do. So you had to do it. But even then, you had to occupy your mind to do other things. Because I don't know about other writers you've spoken to, but I find it's all about trying to cheat your mind into doing stuff. So I will try and read lots of stuff, books, to take stock, if you like, to get stuff in, research, but also reading other novels, often entirely different books, like, I don't know, The Hotel Avocado by Bob Mortimer. I love his voice, and something light and but carefully constructed and fun, not just books like my own. And I find that good. So there's a kind of off the pitch process element, but on the pitch itself, I do my research. I then try and write stuff, and what I try to do is I just try and write. I try and write stuff that is, without knowing everything. So there's a creative element to it, and then I try and I have some research and I have some element to it, but also you want to write the story first and then try and underpin it with facts. or research.
Yeah.
Because the danger otherwise is that you wait for, I'll just know all the information I have, but I'm not writing a history book. I'm not writing a science book. I'm writing a story. So when I have my characters if I know their purpose, I know their goal, and I know how they're going to do it, their rocket, if you like, then I'm on my way, and they can train me. But I need to know my way station. So I don't know. It's not outlined completely because I don't want to write a book I've already read. But I do. There are certain stages which, if I'm going to, I use this yachtsman analogy all the time. But if I'm going to go to, I don't know, South America, I'll go via the Azores, South Carolina, Bermuda, Jamaica, and then down to Santiago, for example. But I'll do it that way. So I'll know that route.
Yeah.
But how I get from each of the way stations is still a bit of a mystery. But I've got to get there. And I've got to get a certain way. So there are nodal points that have to be met. But how I do it, the characters will hopefully let me know in due course. And that process hasn't really changed. I've got more disciplined at plotting out those way stations, and then when I change them, knowing why and reverse engineering it more clearly. Because in the old days, I used to just rewrite everything all the time, and you can't do that. You've got to get forward and then get your undercoat, and then go and write your first draft for yourself, and then your second draft or third draft is what you write for everybody else. Because most stories you tell are what you don't tell them yet. And I think that's what the second draft's about, how you parcel out the information. And that
And also
process.
about having sort of leaving space in the book, isn't it, for the reader as well?
Yeah. No, I think that's really important as well, because I think it's the old show don't tell bit. You try and indicate stuff, and even when everyone gets it, you want them to go, "Oh yeah, I knew that," rather than go, "This is what happened." You want them to get there, even if they've got it and they understand that. No, I know what's happening here. You want to reward them by, when you reveal it, you don't tell them that, but they see the revelation happening on the page. Yeah. Somebody tells somebody else, and you go, "Yeah, I knew that. I had as much knowledge, or if more, than that character did." And that, instead of being "No, I knew that," and boring, that's quite satisfying if it's done well. So yes, exactly that. How you pass that information, knowing whether the reader has the superior knowledge, or the character has, or it's bad if the author has it only, and that's when it gets a bit dull, because the author just goes, "I'm God and this is what happened," because that's not a story, that's a lecture.
Yeah. Well, actually, that leads me nicely onto a question about when you become a detective and you might have to kill them off. Is that something that happened organically, or is that something you sort of think about as you're going?
Yeah, it's a good one, because you, in your head, you like to believe that it kind of, the story takes you there and they get to the cliff and they have to be pushed off it, it's fine. Yeah. But of course it doesn't happen that way, because you get all brave. One minute you get brave and you take a major character and you're going to kill them. You're going to do this thing. You're going to go, and you go, "That's brave," and you go, "Hang on, how are you going to follow that?" You've got to make sure that, because they have if you can get it so that they can do that thing where they die but they don't quite die, that might work. But then when you do that, someone's got to die. There has to be a sacrifice if you started this way. Yeah. Otherwise everyone's going, "Hang on, this is not believable." And I knew in this one there are a few deaths, and it became apparent who would be sacrificed on the good side and the bad side, and how it would work. And when you have a body count of people who die by random, or who are people who you don't like, that's fun, because you're allowed to, because I've said this to people who get quite upset about books that are violent. And you go, "I don't want to be violent. It's not for its own sake." But you don't get you're judged on what you do, not on what you think and what you write. You're judged on what you do, and therefore divorce that. So I must do good deeds and everything else, and I understand that. But when you write, you must allow your mind to take it. And if you've got a character who's unpleasant and they're going to die in a certain way, then it behooves upon you to sort of make it as interesting and as relevant and meaningful as you can. And that is undeniably fun, because you do actually go, "Oh, Other ones which you don't want to go, you've got to are more poignant. You have to are more careful. But even that's, if you can get yourself upset about it, that's a good thing, because you're writing it in a way that it matters. This person who you've got to know is going to be no more. And there's something really weird about mourning the passing of a character you've made up. It's a very odd feeling. But other people who've read this book, there's a character in it, and some people say, he was my favorite character, and when this person goes, it's really sad. And I go, oh, good, because that was meant to be.
Yeah.
I felt sad. So that bit's good. Killing people who are, important plot-wise is dangerous, because as an author you're going, it's like getting a bag of tools and throwing them over the edge. No, I might need the hammer. And and killing bad guys is easy. So it's a mixed bag of when you actually make those kind of choices. But killing your darlings, as in bits of chapters which aren't working, I'm getting better at that. I'm much more dispassionate. But again, sometimes a chapter I like, a bit like the rabbit hole conversation, I'll kill it and put it on the shelf. But sometimes that thought, that idea, might work somewhere else and become relevant in a different book, or even a different part of this book. And so I don't mind killing my darlings now, because I realise the story is all, Yeah.
I think as well is it's in a book that's like this, so much going on, so much peril, and it wouldn't be realistic, would it, to have no death?
No, exactly right. Also, there's no stakes, because what I find a lot of books I get annoyed about is and death. There are deaths which are literally a person dying, but also other deaths of people's dreams dying and everything else. And so many stories I read, there's no real consequence, so there's no stakes. Whereas it's like a lot of superhero films. They're kind of not going to die, therefore, okay, what happened? Well, what's the point? Whereas when you have real jeopardy, you've got to have. If people don't die, you don't realize how dangerous it is.
Yeah.
And this, what's happening, is a big thing. People are being the whole city goes like that and collapses. People up a ladder would fall. People in a car would fall asleep at the wheel. There are going to be casualties.
Yeah, it's going to be consequences.
And yes, I think that's it. Consequences, and the ultimate consequences, lives are lost. But you also want to do it in a way which is both random at times, which is tragic, but also has a kind of poetry to it when the bad guys get what they deserve, and there's a kind of satisfaction in that. But there's also a random element, which is the sad bit. I think.
Yeah. And I think also with your sort of bad guys as well, when you sort of delve into them a bit deeper, they're not all bad, are they? They're not like you're just general, like going out and doing something.
Yes, no, I think I learned that from my acting friends a bit. They kind of say what they want is when they get any characters, they have to go, whether they're the villain or the hero, they have to find something in them which is human, and they understand it. So. And it's often harder with good people, heroes, because they're like dull as ditch water. But if you can find in them an insecurity or vanity or a sort of a weakness that makes them more human, that makes them also more heroic. Because when you think they're this, and suddenly they're extremists, and adversity is a mirror within which a man sees himself, and then you rise to the occasion. Similarly, you can have somebody who's really unpleasant, but suddenly they might do something out of character, or you might learn about their past that explains it. It doesn't condone it, but it does make you go, they're not just a psychopath, the sort of the classic trope of a evil man laughing in the corner, ha ha ha, which is very easy. When I first wrote, a lot of my characters, I had to sort of really get that organized before I got my first deal, because you do want to go, well, they're bad because they're bad. And no, that's what the author wants. The author wants a resistance to it, but you've got to give them a motivation, because in their world, they're the hero. In their world, the bad guys have a purpose and a goal, and they have a mission. In the same with the good guys, it's just not one that most of us would agree with.
No.
And I think that's the trick, I think, in making it work.
Yeah. Because it's easy. It's not easy to write bad guys with just like gratuitous bad guys. It makes it more interesting for the reader as well, isn't it? If you've got that sort of depth, even if it is like you say, they had a bad childhood, or somebody died, or something that turned them back.
I think so too. I think there are very rare occasions when I think actually knowing their backstory dilutes it. Like, for example, Hannibal Lecter. in Silence of the Lambs.
Yeah.
When Thomas Harris, so I thought it was a great book and clever, and he was this, but I mean he was made three-dimensional by his affection for Clara Starling and the fact that he would I think the world's better for having you in it. That other person will have round for dinner, literally, but you I will protect. And that makes you almost like him because he has this human ability to have a connection. But if you understand why he's what he is, he loses some of his magic. And some of the later books, it's given a backstory and stuff, which made you go, oh, so he's normal. He's not some sort of benign demon or some clever demon. He's just a human being who's a bit flawed. But generally speaking, I think it's important to have a backstory because then it makes these, particularly if they're secondary or tertiary characters, you want to understand why they're doing it because people don't go out and kill people and murder people for no reason. You've got to find a reason for it. And I think if you can do that, then they'll do the work for you, as they should do. It's their story,
Is that because is it sort of having the story of it having that sort of, I'm trying to think of the word, like a sort of it is a good, there's a reason they're doing it. It's not just we're not going to just take the world over because we want to be big.
Well, most of them thought that's what they're doing. Yes, exactly. I think again, I like the ambiguity of people who are going to do something quite original. I mean, on the face of it, quite horrific and quite quite sort of quite strong, and yet if they it's the old T.S. Eliot thing about doing the right thing for the wrong reason or the wrong thing for the right reason. There is an element to what your motivation is does inform it, and if there's a rationale for like I will do this, and it's not a trope, but it's actually real. That what gets tricky, and I find more interesting as a writer, is within that group of people who think they have this shared ideal, there are two or three there who aren't, who actually have a different agenda, because there is rarely a group of people who have a completely unified view. But I like the idea of what they're doing, is it good or bad, really, in the overall scheme of things. And that's great to play with as a writer, and hopefully as a reader go, oh yeah, actually, you know what, that's what they're doing is, oh yeah, I kind of on their side, and that bit, and then another bit you're going, well, I'm not, but
it's like that, very much like that when you're reading.
And I think that's much more interesting.
I could see why they're doing it, and then you're like, but that's not really right. It's sort of, it does sort of, you're sort of like the weighing scales of good and bad.
Exactly right. Yeah.
What have you got sort of planned this year with the book? Have you got some events and sort of festivals, anything lined up?
I have. I think I can now talk about them now. I think I've got because I'm doing a couple of these crime writing festivals. So I'm doing a couple of those on panels, I think, because there's a kind of and what I have learned is there's a kind of I hadn't done this on purpose, but because my novel has a certain sort of climate change
sci-fi
element to it, and there's a sci-fi, but there's this climate change element to it as well. So there's a kind of climate change thriller, there's a sci-fi element to it, there's a techno element to it. So and I if I have any opportunities, I'll talk about it. So there's a couple of things. I think I'm on a Chiltern Kills or something, and there's one or two in Scotland I'm doing, and something else I'm doing. But some of them haven't yet been confirmed. They have to me, but I can't sort of say it. But yeah, doing some of those. And I'm just because I've been away so long, Karen. I think I'm grateful to talk to people like you and just get my voice out there and get the hardback out. And it's got good reviews. It's been well received, generally speaking. And I'm going to go on all these, and I'll just basically go out there and sell my wares. The paperback comes out next year, and it gives me a bit of space to write another book and get back in the game, which I do want to do more than films, because I think I don't mind living or dying by the book I've written. When you get involved in film, there are so many people involved in it. The old joke, I think Douglas Adams famously said that it's like it's like trying to cook a steak by getting a line of Hollywood executives to breathe on it. It doesn't cook.
It seems like we have lots of people on here and they talk about the same thing, and quite often they'll have sort of things optioned for a series, and sometimes it does come off, but more often than none it doesn't.
Yeah, I've had 4 books sold, which is ridiculous. 4. I mean, Disney bought one, big companies. So it's not like It's not like a sort of I got a guy who lives in Cheam saying he's buying it. And yet none of them have been made. And so, and I'm very very relaxed about it. And this one we've had a lot of interest from an individual particularly, and a good studio and a good individual. He hasn't tipped yet because I think also we're in a different world now where back in the day people would buy up front. Now it's much more about do their due diligence, check out how it's going, see how it might, and then they might get the turn the water. Much more cautious, which I understand. But so and I'm quite like that because I'm a bit older now, and the idea of getting out there and just less hype, just gradually getting people to like the books, seeing how it goes, play it, but do another book, see how it goes. Because I had all this heat and fire at the beginning, which is great, and I'm very grateful for it. But I quite like just earning it. Let the work speak for itself and earn it, and see how it works that way. And so far, so good. But I've learnt to hope for the best, but we expect the worst.
Did you sort of have you missed that sort of being, in that sort of author sort of sphere, I guess?
Yes, I love coming back into the game. Even I had a lovely lunch about a year ago or so, just when we'd done the deal with Penguin. Had lunch with my editor, who has been with me from the beginning. He did Miracles. That was one of his earlier thrillers with Penguin, so one of my books. So he's been with me since then. And I went off for 10, 11 years off the reservation doing this Hollywood thing and there were other things in my life and stuff. When I come back to this, we had this lovely lunch and we both aged and done. He's a brilliant editor and he's fantastically successful at Penguin, and he should be because he's just great. We had this moment when I said to him, it's like coming home because Hollywood's a very weird place, and I did a lot of work in it and I was seduced by it. And there are some brilliant people there. I mean, really genuinely inspirational, smart people. There are also people who aren't, which can make you a bit and because a lot of people are there just to stop films being made. That's literally their job because they have reasons why it shouldn't be made because they don't get fired then. They get fired if they get a film and it doesn't do well. So their job is to explain why you shouldn't have that one. And that's quite interesting. But writing a novel, you get in your room, you write your book, you go out into the world. I have a good agent who picked up the phone when I called him, got to my publisher, he said, no, it's not crap, it's fine, it's good. I'm back in the game, and it's really nice. And going to some of these events and stuff, and it's good. When I talk to other authors, because I've never really got into the author thing. I've always had other friends outside that. But I'm quite I think I'm more comfortable now with the whole idea of just talking about my books and having talked to people like you and enjoying it and being very grateful for it, basically.
Or when I put the chat in the group, there was quite a bit of interest of people saying, "Oh, I've read all his books," and so you've still.
Where's he been? Where's he been? Yeah.
Yeah. Where have you been?
What I love about that though is that I don't know how many of them are, one or two, but there was this coming back. There was this nervousness that your agent would go, publisher would go, he's a bit old-fashioned. I'll fart now. I thought it was going to work. But what surprised me and touched me actually is how many readers I didn't know I had who go, "Oh, I've read your books, really nice," and really sort of supportive. And I can't tell you how important that is if you've been away and come back and written this book. And it matters more than anything else to have people who enjoy your books, which is why you write. You write to be read. I do anyway. And secondly, to have people who have waited for you and thought, "Oh, good, I'll get it from you," and that is very, very humbling. And I don't mean that in a sort of false way. I mean that genuinely.
No.
You still exist. You're alive still in this world. And that's fascinating. Because there was a moment in the last 10 years when I thought, I'm going to never write another book.
Yeah.
And that's quite a chilling thought at 3 a.m. And then when you have your idea and you write this book and people go, "Yeah, it's not bad," it's a massive relief. And it's quite invigorating, really.
And as a reader as well, if you've got an author that you really like and they just sort of disappear and then they come back, that's even better.
Well, so long as they like it. And
because
I sometimes there is just fear when people get excited. You go, "Oh God, I hope they don't go, I preferred the first album. I like all the songs on that."
But you're always going to get that.
But so far it's been good. So far I think I spoke to somebody else recently. Relief and gratification are the two words I would use at this stage. That's about it. I'm very cautious about all this stuff. Even when we get amazing things happening, I'm always a bit like, and my wife tells me off for like, just enjoy it. And I'm going, yeah, but it's but so far so good. Yeah.
Good. We're just coming up to the hour. Just before you go, who's sort of your inspiration for writing? Who sort of inspired you in your career?
I gave up my job to write, and I think that at the time first of all, when I first began reading and my first storytelling was a guy called Roger Lancashire Green, who wrote the Greeks, myths and legends, but for kids to read, and I loved them. And that was when I realized that stories were a thing. And of course, they were the original stories, the original Homer and the Iliad and the Odyssey and stuff. So that's one thing I'd say. But then we knew I wanted to write sort of this sort of fiction because I'd read I remember reading Jurassic Park,
The
Silence of the Lambs, and The Godfather in about the space of about 5 or 6 years. And when I was reading all those, and I also read some Jane Austen and Thomas Hardy, and they were kind of really odd. But Thomas Hardy was big. Yeah, I know. I'm an absolute, I go after everything. But Thomas Hardy was big and bold, big ideas. Jane Austen really small, but really sort of scalpel clever about characterization.
Yeah.
I love the dialogue in Godfather. The big ideas in Jurassic Park were absolutely got me, and that's what the original idea was. Why do all these books about genes talk about monsters and the fly and viruses? Why can't it be about the genes for leadership, for Churchill, or penny drop, the greatest healer that ever lived, perhaps Christ? What would you find there? And also the Silence of the Lambs, the claustrophobic.
I love that book.
Told.
It's so
fabulous.
good.
It stayed with me and they gave me the confidence because when I was in another job in marketing and advertising, Jenny said, "Well, just take a year off. You've got this idea, write the damn thing." And I had no evidence that I could do it, but I gave myself permission because all these other books around me, those ones were my touchstones, and those were my inspiration, I think, to allow me to take the leap and write the book, my first one, of which I've carried on, and now this is my last one, the 7th so far, Manhattan Down.
Yeah. Well, thank you. And Manhattan Down is out now.
Thank you.
And thank you so much for joining us this evening, Michael. It's been an absolute pleasure. And
thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thank you. Thanks, everybody.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.